Hello there, and welcome back to Pillow Time Past, where history gently drifts through your dreams. Tonight, as the world quiets down and the day slowly fades, allow yourself to settle in, somewhere soft, somewhere safe, and let your mind wander into the deeper corners of the past. The royal halls of history may glitter with gold, but behind the velvet curtains, strange customs, stirred rituals, not only but ones that might send a modern soul running. Imagine waking to the scent of rosewater and incense, only to discover your morning medicine includes crushed pearls, or perhaps powdered mummy. Tonight's journey will carry us through the twisted comfort of palaces and thrones, unveiling the curious, often shocking habits of kings and queens across time. Rituals of beauty, medicine, fear, and the fragile need to feel immortal. Let's begin with a soft glimpse into what it might have felt like to wake up not as you are now, but as a royal figure in a very different age. Segment 1. A day in the life of a royal's strange routines from the moment they woke. Imagine, it's just before dawn. The chamber is still. Heavy drapes block the light. Servants move quietly in the shadows, tending to the fire before the monarch stirs. The air is cool, perfumed with oils rubbed into the walls to chase away foul spirits. Outside, the world is waking, but within these thick stone walls, your day begins not with freedom, but ceremony. Across many kingdoms and centuries, royalty did not simply wake, they were awoken. In Versailles, for example, the French king's waken was a full event, called a Dozens of courtiers would gather in the king's bedroom. They would bow, whisper greetings, and wait for the privilege of watching him rise. One noble might help slip a sleeve on. Another might offer scented gloves. It was all theater status, by service. And yet, for the monarch, it was routine. You might imagine this to be glamorous, but there was very little privacy. Even bodily functions had rituals. Some royals had gold-plated not for comfort, but so their waists could be inspected by court physicians. It was believed that urine, stool, and sweat held secrets to royal health, and enemies watched those signs closely too. In Tudor England, Elizabeth I bathed rarely but powdered herself obsessively with white, led to achieve a ghostly. Her morning ritual included applying thick layers of toxic makeup to cover scars left by smallpox. Her teeth, by many accounts, were blackened by decay, but she smiled rarely and covered her mouth with a fan. Further east, in Ming China, the emperor's waking was more structured. Servants would bring scrolls, ritual incense, and dietary tonics made from ginseng and deer antler. Every sip, every breath was thought to maintain divine order. The emperor was not merely a man, he was a celestial body in motion. A single misstep could mean cosmic imbalance. And then there were the bizarre medical practices. Catherine de Medici of France, for instance, was said to begin her day with a tincture of gold and herbs. Gold, in liquid form, was believed to extend life. Others favored powdered emeralds or crushed sapphires. These elixirs of life shimmered in crystal flasks, but often came with slow poisoning. In 17th century Russia, Tsar Peter the Great kept jars of pulled teeth on display and believed that removing bad humors from the mouth cured many illnesses. His mornings often began with violent dental extractions on himself, or unwilling. Imagine waking to that. As the morning continued, so did the rituals, perfuming the wigs, powdering the faces, dressing in layers of silk and furage, step bound to rules. Nothing was casual. Even meals were prescribed. A piece of swan, perhaps, or roasted, peacock gilded and cold. But beneath it all, what unites these scenes is control. Royal life, so often imagined as free and indulgent, was, in truth, rigid, strange, and deeply superstitious. The morning was only the beginning of a long day of appearances, judgments, and survival. And now, as the royal robes are fastened and ceremonial slippers placed upon polished feet, we turn our attention from the rhythm of a royal morning to one ruler whose life and obsessions became a story of bizarre extremes. Segment 2, The Biography. Event, a deep dive into a bizarre royal life. Let us now turn our attention to one figure in particular, a man so emblematic of royal eccentricity. He has come to symbolize the strange and unsettling behaviors power can cultivate when left unchecked. His name was King Charles VI of France, but to many in his court, behind silken whispers and veiled eyes, he was known by another title, Charles the Mad. Imagine yourself walking softly through the echoing stone halls of the Hotel St. one of Charles' preferred royal residences in late 14th century Paris. The air is cool, and heavy tapestries line the walls, muffling the outside world. Servants move in a choreographed hush, not daring to speak above a murmur. Everyone watches. Everyone listens, because no one knows who Charles will be today. At just 11 years old, Charles became king, and for a brief, shining moment, it seemed he would be a wise and stable ruler. His early reign brought reforms, stability, and even the end of internal rivalries. He was crowned with grandeur, dressed in cloth of gold robes that glimmered under candlelight. He presided over lavish feasts, jousts, and parades. But beneath this glittering exterior, something was shifting. By his mid-20s, the cracks began to show. In the summer of 3092, Charles experienced his first psychotic break. He had been traveling with his men through a sun-drenched forest when something within him snapped. Without warning, he drew his sword and attacked his own companions, killing several before being restrained. He then collapsed, trembling and pale, falling into a coma that lasted days. When he awoke, he remembered nothing. This would mark the beginning of his descent into what we now understand as severe mental illness. But to those around him, it was something darker, something inexplicable. They spoke of demons, of curses, of the king being touched by the divine, or the damned. From that day forward, his behavior unraveled like fraying silk. There were long stretches of catatonia, when Charles would not speak or move. At times, he failed to recognize his own wife and children. But the most haunting of his delusions was perhaps this. He believed he was made of glass. The glass delusion, as it came to be known, was a real psychological condition noted in several nobles of the time. But Charles took it to heartbreaking extremes. He wore specially reinforced clothing to protect his fragile body and forbade anyone from touching him, terrified he might shatter. He ordered iron rods to be sewn into his garments and sat alone for hours, immobile, convinced that even a strong breeze might destroy him. On other days, he would flee down palace corridors, shrieking that his enemies were coming to crush his transparent bones. His courtiers, ever cautious, indulged his fears. They whispered soothing reassurance. They placed pillows along the walls, and they walked on tiptoe through the throne room. There was also the matter of the bal des ardents, the dance of the burning men. It was meant to be a night of merriment, a costumed ball, held in 3093 to celebrate a noblewoman's remarriage. Charles, in a rare moment of coherence, participated in a wild man dance, donning a flammable costume made of resin-soaked linen. The tragedy struck when one of the torches, carried by his brother, no less, ignited the dancers. The scene that followed was one of silent horror nobles, ablaze, screaming wordlessly as the orchestra played on in confusion. 4 men burned to death. Charles survived, barely, protected by the swift thinking of a lady-in-waiting who smothered the flames with her gown. But the incident left deep psychological scars. It seemed to push Charles further into his fragile world of glass and shadow. Despite it all, Charles remained king. He would drift in and out of lucidity, occasionally issuing decrees during his brief moments of clarity. Yet it was his wife, Queen Isabeau, and his brother Louis, of who truly governed behind the scenes. The kingdom suffered from civil unrest and war. The English advanced under Henry V, and France itself was splintering. But Charles, often oblivious, wandered his gardens or lay in his bed, hands clasped gently, gazing at candlelight with hollow eyes. He died in 1422, at the age of 53, alone. and largely forgotten by the time his last breath came. His reign, once hopeful, had become a tragic emblem of decay. So, what are we left with? A king, a crown, and the slow unraveling of a mind under the unbearable weight of power. Charles VI's life reminds us that even those clothed in velvet and gold are not immune to suffering. That the human mind, brilliant, delicate, and mysterious, may falter in ways that history can record but never fully explain. And now, as candlelight flickers low, let us turn from the story of one man and step into something more obscure. The strange mysteries and rituals of royalty itself. Segment 3. Mystery Archaeology. Culture. Strange royal practices and their hidden meanings. The strange behaviors of royalty were not always signs of madness. Sometimes, there were rituals steeped in centuries of symbolism, custom, and belief to the outside world. These habits may seem absurd, unsettling, even cruel, but in their time, they were sacred, necessary, and, in some cases, terrifyingly powerful. Let us now descend further into the hidden chambers of royal life, where every gesture had meaning, and where ancient customs still leave historians and archaeologists puzzled. The royal touch. The king who healed by laying hands in medieval Europe. It was believed that monarchs were chosen by God not merely to rule, but to heal. This belief was embodied in a strange and theatrical ritual known as the royal touch. From the 11th century through the 18th, kings of England and France would hold ceremonies in which they touched the sick, especially those afflicted with scrofula, a disfiguring form of tuberculosis. These public rituals drew crowds by the thousands. The king, dressed in fine robes, would gently place his hands on the ill and murmur a blessing. In England, it was often accompanied by the gift of a special gold coin. What's most chilling is that these events weren't considered symbolic. The people truly believed the monarch's touch could cure disease, and some did report sudden recoveries. Placebo, divine intervention, or perhaps the intense belief itself had healing power. But behind the miracle was another truth. These rituals reinforced the king's divinity. Not just a man, but a conduit of heaven, toilets of power. The groom of the stool now, from the divine to the deeply uncomfortable. Few royal traditions were as bizarre or as revealing as the office of the groom of the stool in Tudor England. Yes, it was exactly what it sounds like. This was the man whose job it was to assist the king with his private toilet needs. But don't laugh too quickly. This role was no lowly servant. In fact, the groom of the stool was often one of the king's most trusted advisors, because he had the monarch's ear and access to the one place where a king couldn't hide behind ceremony. Henry VIII, in particular, was known to share secrets, policies, and grievances while seated upon his elaborately carved royal commode. The groom not only wiped, but documented bowel movements and advised on dieting, acting almost as physician and Think about that. In a world of spies, rivals, and endless etiquette, the man who cleaned up after the king held more real power than most nobles ever dreamed. Ritual cannibalism, the strange use of mummy dust during the 16th and 17th centuries, European royalty, and their wealthy elites consumed what they believed was a miracle medicine. Mummy powder, yes, literal powdered human remains. Traders would grind up ancient Egyptian mummies, stolen from tombs, into fine dust. This macabre powder was believed to cure internal bleeding, epilepsy. Apothecaries sold it at a premium, and it was especially popular among royals, who viewed it as a mysterious elixir of life. Even King Charles II of England reportedly kept a personal tincture of powdered skull, a drink he called the King's Drops. The idea was simple: to consume the strength and spirit of the dead. But looking back, it's hard not to feel a shiver. That centuries of royal refinement rested, quite literally, on a foundation of desecrated bones, royal sleep rituals, fear of assassination, Even sleep was not safe in the royal world. Kings and queens throughout history developed bizarre habits to protect themselves during the night. Take Louis XIV, the Sun King of France. His going-to-bed routine was a full-blown ceremonial event called the courtiers gathered around to watch him undress, be bathed, and tucked into his velvet-draped bed. But the ritual served more than vanity. It helped control access. By ritualizing sleep, Louis could dictate who entered his inner circle. And behind his thick curtains, guards waited in secret, ready to intervene if a blade appeared in the dark. In Russia, Catherine the Great reportedly had up to 5 decoy bedrooms, each ornately furnished and guarded, so no assassin could ever know where she truly slept. And in ancient China, emperors used similar deception, rotating chambers nightly in the Forbidden City. Power, after all, is most vulnerable in the dark, and the royal bed was often a battlefield. Silent meals. When royals dined without speaking one final mystery, the royal dinner table, we imagine banquets filled with laughter, wine, and music. But in many courts, meals were silent. In the Spanish Habsburg court, for instance, royal family members often ate in complete silence, sometimes separated by gold screens. Servants brought courses with heads bowed low. Music played softly in the background. Why? Silence was a symbol of authority, a demonstration that the monarch needed no idle chatter. Even in chewing, they reigned supreme. But one wonders, was it still silence? If your mind screamed with loneliness, royal rituals are more than footnotes of history. They were performances, choreographed, to assert power, control, and legacy. Some protected the throne, some concealed human weakness, and some were simply the echo of ancient fears still haunting the halls of gold. As we drift now toward the final act, let us ascend from chamber to palace roof and glimpse the glittering lives of the royal elite, those whose bizarre habits weren't born from madness or mystery, but from having everything and never, ever being told no. And now, as we gently leave behind the veiled corridors of royal rituals and strange beliefs, let us slowly descend from the incense-sweetened heights of palaces to the quiet hum of life outside their gilded gates. In this final stretch of our journey, we will drift through the contrast, the vast, jarring divide between those who ruled and those who simply endured. Imagine it is the early morning in 18th century France. In the glittering salons of Versailles, golden light seeps through tall windows draped in silk. The air is perfumed with orange blossom water. A servant gently opens the shutters of the king's private chamber. The monarch stirs, not alone, but surrounded by dozens of courtiers, and his waking, like every moment of his life, is a performance. The ceremonial level. The king does not dress himself. That task belongs to others, ranked and ordered by nobility. One may hold a shirt, another is a higher-ranking noble may have the honor of fastening a button or presenting a mirror. All of it, a grand ballet of hierarchy. Now, just imagine, beyond those towering palace walls, perhaps only a few miles away, a peasant woman begins her day in a very different way. Her home is one room, shared with children, livestock, and the sting of cold morning air. There is no ceremony, no perfumed bath. Her first task is kindling a fire, not for luxury, but for warmth, and for boiling yesterday's bread into something soft enough to eat. The gap between these two worlds is not just of wealth, but of rhythm, of purpose, of meaning. In the Ottoman Empire, the Sultan's harem shimmered with opulence. Marble fountains whispered in the background. Silk slippers padded across mosaic tiles. Attendants with hinted hands brought trays of candied rose petals and almond sweets. The Sultan could summon poetry, music, dancers, or simply silence with a nod. But far beyond the Topkapi walls, in the sprawling neighborhoods of Constantinople, a fisherman mended his net by lantern light, hands cracked from salt. A mother bartered for bread with the last of her coin. Life was immediate, physical. Every day carried risk, every night uncertainty, and yet the royalty, they remained largely unaware, insulated. Some rulers were sincerely oblivious to how their people lived. Queen Marie Antoinette is famously, and perhaps apocryphally, remembered for saying, "Let them eat cake," upon hearing that the poor lacked bread. Whether or not she spoke those exact words, the sentiment of a life detached from the real endures. The disconnect could be more than economic. It was philosophical. Many monarchs believed their blood was different, that their bodies were chosen, divine, and with that belief came indulgence without guilt. In Russia, the Tsar Nicholas II dined on meals of 50 courses, while much of the countryside starved. In Persia, Shahs built palaces with mirrored ceilings and fountains that spouted rosewater, while laborers toiled in blistering heat, without rest. But contrast did not always mean ignorance. Some royals were painfully aware of the divide. Emperor Akbar of the Mughal Empire often disguised himself and wandered the streets of Agra, hoping to understand his people. King Edward I of England ordered taxes to be lowered after watching a town struggle to feed itself. But these were exceptions. Brief flickers of empathy in a long night of indifference. What's perhaps most strange is that the grandeur of royal life often brought its own kind of suffering. The poor were hungry, but the royalty, they were watched, every word recorded, every step choreographed. Some could not even choose whom to marry or when to sleep. Their meals might be grand, but they could not touch them without fear of poison. Their clothing, heavy with gold thread, weighed them down. Their shoes, so delicate, were unfit for walking. Freedom, it seems, was rare on both sides, but in very different ways. As the night deepens, let us reflect on that contrast. One side, velvet, jewels, the rustle of silk, and the taste of honeyed figs. The other, soot, sweat, a child's cry in a cold room, and the hope that tomorrow brings more than today. History shows us both, not to shame or envy, but to understand, to recognize how privilege shapes the world, and how those who endure without it carry stories equally worth telling. And so, we come to rest at the border between those worlds, not to judge, but to listen. With that, let your thoughts soften, and your breath slow, as we prepare to leave the past behind. And now, we slowly close the heavy pages of tonight's journey through strange royalty. Pages worn with gold, inked with mystery, and thick with silence. We have wandered through the candlelit corridors of palaces. We've watched kings wake under velvet canopies, and queens bathe in milk and superstition. We've stood quietly at the edges of ceremonies too bizarre to invent, and peered beyond palace walls, where life was harder, but somehow more free. Through it all, history whispered, not in shouts, but in shadows, in strange customs, in lavish feasts, in locked doors and soft footsteps, in rituals no one remembers the reason for, but everyone was afraid to break. And though the world has changed, the robes traded for suits, the thrones now symbolic, one truth remains. Power, when left unchecked, always drifts toward the strange, toward excess, toward the surreal. Tonight, you've touched that world, not as a subject, not as a servant, but as a silent guest, just passing through. So now, breathe deeply. Let your thoughts float like dust motes in the light of a forgotten hall. Let the faces of kings and queens fade into soft shapes. Let the weight of gold and guilt slip away. You are safe. You are still. And the past, bizarre as it was, cannot follow you here. Let sleep wrap around you like velvet. Let dreams drift down like old portraits in a quiet gallery. And know that when you wake, history will still be waiting. Good night, fellow. Until the next strange story unfolds.